this interview series with Outlook Money magazine. The series is called Money Maestros in conversation with Nidhi Sinha, editor, Outlook Money. Our guest today is Meir Statman, the Glenn Klimek Professor of Finance at Santa Clara University in California. Statman is a pioneer in behavioral finance, and his groundbreaking research sheds light on how investors and managers make their financial decisions, among other things. So, our conversation today and the learnings from his research can help investors make balanced decisions by overcoming their own cognitive and emotional errors. Welcome to this show, Mr. Statman, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Nidhi. I'm delighted to be with you.
Okay, so let me start the interview with a question on behavioral finance itself, because we all know that in its early days, there was much debate around this subject. So could you tell us a bit about those early days and how it has evolved over the years?
Well, I came to Santa Clara University at the very beginning of 1980, and I was fortunate to meet Hersh Shefrin, who was working on issues of saving, issues of self-control, and mental accounting and framing in the context of savings. And as I was listening to him, it occurred to me that in that framework, we can understand the issues of dividends. That is, why is it that people care about getting dividends rather than create what Miller Modigliani called homemade dividends by just selling shares? And it occurred to me that what people do is use dividends as a self-control device. That is, if they spend from capital, if they sell shares, then they might sell too many and they are not going to save enough. And so people constrain themselves by saying, spend from dividends, spend from income, but don't dip into capital. And so Hersh and I proceeded to write a paper about that, which we submitted to a top journal on finance, the Journal of Financial Economics, and we didn't really expect it to be accepted because it was so different from what was going on. And we were very fortunate that the referee turned out to be Fisher Black of Black-Scholes formula and the writings, and he just loved the paper. Wow. And the editor, despite his misgivings and the misgivings of the people of his board, chose to publish it. And so we were very, very lucky in that. And of course, there was a lot of objection that we're going to directions that we should not go to, that it is not rational. One of my colleagues who's met me at that conference said, I like the paper, but I cannot teach it to my students. It's not rational. and so it was funny in this way. And then we went on, and I went on my own, because there are so many things that now can make sense, can be explained. And so instead of asking if it's rational or irrational, the question is, do people do that? And why is it that they do that? And so that was the beginning. And early on, people hesitated to join. And I was thinking, good, because they just leave the entire field to me. So I don't have to rush. Now, of course, it is everywhere. And so it is. And so I just move on to do further things and develop it further.
Right. But what is coming to me is also there was a lot of judgment that you perhaps faced at the beginning. But what kept you going?
Well, if you're going to be a professor and you're going to do scholarship, you might as well do stuff that is interesting to me, that you think is really making a contribution. In fact, I came to the United States from Israel because when I completed my studies at the Hebrew University and got a job as a financial analyst, after a few months, I realized that it's not interesting to me, that it's not going to be a vocation. Yes, I earned money. Yes, if I stayed there, I'll have a pension, but I'm going to have a miserable life. And this is why I took the step of coming to the United States for the PhD. And so that is what I did. I did also standard finance because I was concerned about tenure and what people are going to say and all of that. But my passion was, as soon as I discovered that, my passion was in what we now call behavioral finance. At that time, of course, there was no such thing as behavioral finance. We just did stuff that was funny to most people in finance.
So, in a way, you followed your heart, and that is great to hear. But now, while I was, reading some excerpts from your book, I also realized that, there is a third generation of economists, behavioral economists that are coming in. So, do you think they are different than, like the second generation was different? I think they moved from irrational and rational debate to the normal debate. How is the third generation different according to you, and what are they talking about?
Well, the scholarship in behavioral finance is still centered on what I call the first generation of behavioral finance. And in the first generation of behavioral finance, people are often described as irrational.
Right.
And so we moved from standard finance, where people are described as rational. Rational people care only about wealth, about maximizing their wealth, and they are free of cognitive and emotional errors that distract them from getting there. For example, rational people don't trade too much. Now, in fact, I was just reviewing an interview that I did along with colleagues with Danny Kahneman, who passed away recently. And he wrote in his book that he cringes when he hears that he and Amos Tversky proved that people are irrational. He said, irrational people are crazy. This is not what people are. I chose to call them normal. People are not stupid. People are not irrational. People are generally knowledgeable. Yes, normal people, are sometimes ignorant, but normal people can learn. And normal people often make mistakes, but normal people learn from those mistakes. And so we can increase that ratio of knowledgeable to ignorant and smart to stupid and get better at it. And so that really is the point. And I think that people who write about behavioral finance, looking at evidence, they still are fascinated with the notion that people make cognitive and emotional errors. Yes, but that is not the end of it. And so when I think about the second generation, as I describe it, people are normal, and people want more than utilitarian benefits of wealth. That is food, clothing, shelter, and so on. People want also expressive and emotional benefits. And I started working on socially responsible investing in the 1980s, because to me, that was a perfect example of those three kinds of benefits. That is, people who care about being true to their values, for example, protecting the environment, want those expressive and emotional benefits of being true to their values. And often we are willing to sacrifice some utilitarian benefits to achieve those expressive and emotional benefits. And if we think about it, we all do that. That is, when we contribute to charity, of course, we diminish our wealth, but then we get that satisfaction, those expressive and emotional benefits to say we are good, decent people who help people who are not as good. And when we say provide to our families, that is utilitarian benefits because we have to pay for feeding our children and educating them and so on. But as a father, I also take pride in being a good father, being able to provide for my family and children. And so when you look at it, it is really pretty obvious that that is what people do. And why would we insist on that stick figure of rational people when we have normal people, when we look at ourselves and we see how normal we are, and we look at other people and we see that they are normal too? How is it that we can then shut our eyes and when it comes to our scholarship, pretend that we are those rational people who care only about wealth?
Yeah. So, in fact, that brings me to an interesting question from India. Like in India, in general, the culture is that the kids will take care of aging parents, right? And that's what maybe normal people think about and do it, at least in the earlier generation. But a lot of debates are now coming up that, when you are kind of paying for your children, think about your retirement as well. So, somewhere, um, do we need to strike a balance? And how does normality play out in such situations?
Well, there are differences by culture. There was actually a very interesting story about India, about a man who financed his son's education, even getting a pilot's license, paid for a fancy wedding. But his son and his wife have no children. And so he's looking at his friends and they all have children, so they get to play with the grandkids, and he cannot. And so he said to his son, if you don't have kids, I'm going to ask you to pay back all the money that I invested in you. Even sued him in a court of law. So you can see those kinds of things of what are the obligations we have towards our children and grandchildren, and what their obligations are towards us. And as you say, in India, things are changing. So this notion that parents invest in kids and then kids support their parents in old age, that is at least changing. At least there is a tension there. And in the United States, you have, it's not that different. That is, sometimes there is a description that parents just care about their children, and once they are out of the house, they take care of themselves. But in the United States, we talk about the notion of the sandwich generation. That is a generation that has to support their kids, and then they also have elderly parents who need support, and they don't abandon them. That is, there are, of course, adult children who abandon their elderly parents, but more common is the case where people really sacrifice a lot of their lives and take a lot of burdens to support their elderly parents. And so it is really just human that there is such a thing as family and that we care about one another. and that we care also about the community beyond our family.
True. So, in a way, when you kind of call people normal or instead of rational or irrational, you're also being more empathetic towards the human race, as I see it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you have to be empathetic towards yourself, and you have to be empathetic towards other people. And, I say every person, every family has points of pain. So there are many domains to life well-being. Finances, of course, is very, very important, but we also have, of course, family, and we have friends, and we have issues of health, and we have issues of education and work and religion and society. All of those things either add to our life well-being or detract from it. And there are people, I imagine, where all those domains are perfect. They have perfect kids and perfect health and so on. My family is not perfect in this way. That is, we have our older daughter who is unfortunately disabled by mental illness, and we support her. Now, the thing is that the way I see it is that we have injuries in some of those domains of life well-being, and we use, in a way, resources, surplus, you can call it, from other domains to fill that in or to heal those injuries. And so in our case, given that we have plenty of money and ample finances domain, we can support our older daughter without constraining our own budget. So in this sense, we are very, very fortunate. And we're also fortunate that we have a younger daughter who loves her older sister and who supports her. And so when I talk with people, I tell people, just as I told you and the listeners about my family, and when I disclose our pains, they disclose theirs. And we end up empathizing with each other and comforting each other and really enhancing the well-being of each other as we do that. And so it is really very important. It is hard for people to do that.
So, in fact, while you were talking about this, I was also thinking about your latest book on well-being, which is called Wealth of Well-being, A Holistic Approach to Behavioral Finance, where you have talked about how money can affect a lot of relationships, whether it's a marriage or with your grandparents, parents, and others, other such relationships, maybe friends also. So, could you talk a bit about that and tell us what the book is about and how is it different from, say, your earlier takes on, you had that groundbreaking book on finance for normal people?
So in Finance for Normal People, I described what I call the second generation of behavioral finance. And the second generation of behavioral finance is, as I said before, people care not just about wealth, not just about utilitarian benefits, but also for expressive and emotional benefits. And socially responsible investing is one example. But in this new book, A Wealth of Well-being, I expand that circle of finance wider. And I say, eventually, it is not just that we care about utilitarian benefits, money, finances. We also care about about expressive and emotional benefits. But eventually, it is more than that. It is more than financial well-being. It is life well-being, because what we are trying to do is get life well-being. Now, of course, finances are important by themselves. That is, more money adds to our well-being. It is as simple as that. Rich people are happier than poor ones. But more than that, finances really underlie all of the domains of life well-being. And so we have, as I said, family and friends and health and education and religion and more. And I think about those as being like a portfolio. And in a portfolio, some stocks are up, some stocks are down, but eventually it is the total that matters. It is the life well-being that matters. And in a way, you compensate for the losers by having some winners. And so what I did in the book is really take the scientific literature, and there are lots of people who work on issues of well-being, economists, sociologists, psychologists, who know nothing about finance. And then you have lots of people in finance who know nothing about well-being. And so what I did was to bring that scientific literature about well-being and couple it with stories that bring life to it. Because, of course, scholars and I, when I do sort of scientific studies, I don't talk about anecdotes. I talk about general findings. But general findings tend to be pretty dry. Even if you say things like, well, parents who have a disabled child, that diminishes their well-being by about 10%. Well, what is that? I mean, tell me something in addition to that about a family who has a disabled child, so I can understand what it is if I don't have one myself. And so what I do is I combine that scientific literature with stories that I get from everywhere, including stories about India and including stories about China and Mexico and so on, to really get a sense that people everywhere strive to gain life well-being. And of course, we are different somewhat by culture, by country, but underneath that, we're all human. And so you are speaking to me from India, and I speak to you from the United States, from California. And then it is not such that we have to explain a whole lot to understand each other. You're a human and so am I, and we understand the experiences of one another and empathize with one another.
You were talking about some of the stories that you have talked about from India. So if you could tell our listeners about some of those stories, they might be really interested in knowing.
Well, I will talk about one aspect of India that I know. So I have colleagues who are originally from India, and I have lots of neighbors who are originally from India. They tend to be people very much like me, immigrants. They are people of higher education and people who care deeply about family. But they come from a culture that in some ways is different from, say, my culture or the culture of many Americans. And one aspect of those differences is the drive that I see among families who are originally from India to get their kids into Ivy League colleges, to get them into top colleges. And I was wondering why this is so, because now it is very common in the United States that people are really not just from India, people from everywhere are so keen on getting their kids into Ivy League and other top universities. And reading about India, I know that there is in fact, one city where there are cram schools that prepare people to apply to those top universities, and most don't make it. They might be children of just laborers, small businesses, and so on, not highly educated themselves, but they really would like to have their kids at top universities, and it sort of breaks hearts, of course, to see that. And I understand also from speaking with our neighbors that in India, it really matters a great deal, not just in terms of expressive and emotional benefits of my kid is a graduate of a top university, but also in terms of money to graduate from a top university, because it opens doors, say, in particular government employment and so on. The United States is really different in that as long as you graduate from a college, even if it is not among the top ones, you're likely to do well. In fact, in terms of money, it turns out that you don't earn much more, if anything, on average, from graduating from an Ivy League college than a lesser college. And so Americans know that there are many kinds of avenues to getting wealthy, to getting established. You can even be an owner of a plumbing business, and you can earn a whole lot more than a professor at the university. But that desire to have the kids at the top university, some of it has to do with that culture, and that culture made sense in India, but it makes much less sense in the United States. And lots of the people from India who I know kind of understand that, and they say, wait a minute, we are in a new place. There are different rules of the game here. What is important for my kids is to get a good education in an area they are interested in, for example, engineering, rather than push them too hard to get into a top university.
Right. So you are seeing people who are adapting to the new culture.
There are many parents who themselves are graduates of top universities in India or the United States, and they really try conscientiously to just take their foot off the accelerator a bit. There is one mother who said that she tells her daughter, it does not really matter which college you go to, just go to a college. And the daughter said, Dad and you both graduated from Stanford, and I wanted to make you proud by being admitted to Stanford or a similar university. And the mother said, I never mentioned to my daughter that I want her to go to Stanford or university like that, but I must have in some way conveyed to her that that is important. And that made her understand what she is conveying, even if not in words, and really try to help her daughter understand that she should, of course, focus on her studies and activities and so on, and strive as high as she can. But she's not going to be a failure if she does not make it to Stanford or similar.
But we are also talking about this cultural capital that kind of takes us to these kind of conversations and decisions and indirect understanding that children inculcate. In your book, in fact, you have spoken about these four capitals, which is financial, cultural, social, and personal. Would you like to talk about that a bit?
Yes, so cultural capital, if I can begin there and continue with the description that focused on education, cultural capital has to do with knowledge of the culture that you are in and other cultures as well, so that you feel comfortable in it. And so if you are in the United States and people talk about universities, that you know something about that, you know how people dress, and so you know what kind of business uh, is dress is, but also what is, say, in a party or a wedding. And so I see, of course, many women from India who wear beautiful saris at weddings, and so it is a different culture, but it is really part of American culture as well. People understand that, and people admire that. And so there are many aspects in clothing, in interest, what kind of music you are interested in, what kind of books you are reading, that you have to know. And when I came to the United States from Israel, of course, I did not have the cultural capital of Americans, and so I did not, I had to kind of learn from my mistakes, and I told my classmates, uh, if you hear me mispronounce a word or mangle a sentence, even if you understand what it is that I meant, stop and tell me so that I will know. So I felt like an anthropologist trying to make sense of the natives. And so that really is an important thing. You go to an interview for a job, and the people are, say, at the top law firm, they have a particular culture, uh, as simple as knowing which utensils to use for fish and for meat, that kind of stuff. And if you sit there and you don't know which, and you don't know how to fold the napkin and so on, you just feel uncomfortable in that sense. So that is kind of about cultural capital. Social capital has to do with who are your friends, who are the people that you can rely on and who can rely on you. Say in the working class in the United States, family is really at the center of social capital. And so you can rely on your brother to maybe borrow money from if you need, and to take care of the kids. You can ask a neighbor to help with that, and you're going to do the same thing. Among the elite, among people with high income and education, um, that is, I would find it really odd if somebody of my kind came to me and said, "Hey, Mayor, can you lend me $500?" I can do that, but that sounds really very out of character. So among the elites, of course, family is still central, but we tend to have many more of those shallow friendships where there is somebody we know professionally, and if we need, for example, a reference for a job, or a contact for a job, we know that we can speak with them. Somebody who knows that I'm a professor and whose son or daughter is applying, they might be bewildered by what it takes, and they might say, let's talk with Mayor and find out what he thinks about those issues. And so that is about cultural capital. And when it comes to personal capital, um, just think about beauty. People who are more beautiful enjoy life more. They have more friends. They are more attractive to people of the opposite sex. Their life well-being is higher. Unfortunately, there's discrimination by race, and so if you are Black, you're going to find that one way or another, of course, not everyone, but you will find that discrimination is really getting in your way. When you are in a store, some Black people say that they feel like somebody is watching them to make sure that they're not stealing anything. You know, that really is a very, very uncomfortable feeling. And so on. And then you have personality. There is people who are optimistic, tend to enjoy life more than people who are always thinking about the half empty uh, glass. Some of those things we can change. Some of those things are just part of who we are, and we cannot. And we just have to understand that and live within those constraints.
And what
Now,
about
money, of course, we talked about, and so I will leave that alone. But of course, financial capital matters a great deal.
so yeah, so you were talking about education also earlier and how it plays a role in your overall well-being. So would you like to elaborate a bit more?
So education brings many things. Of course, it brings a lot of knowledge, and it brings ways of thinking, critical thinking, that is useful in gaining employment later on, as managers, as engineers, as physicians and lawyers, and so on. But of course, it does more than that. Uh, One thing really is that universities, among other things, also serve as what economists call a marriage market. That is, you get to meet people of the opposite sex, uh, and very often end up marrying them. There's actually a very interesting story uh, about that. You know, one of the interesting things that relate to India as well is matrimonial ads. That is, in the old days in the United States, women would specify, or when matchmakers would look into it, that of course men who had professions and high income were in greater demand than people who were, say, manual laborers. Now, when you look at American matrimonial ads, those sites where people meet, people say things about personality. They don't really mention money. Whereas in India, people are still quite open, that they're looking for people of a particular caste and a particular level of income, and so on, and they're not shy about it. Of course, money matters in the United States as much as India. It is just that part of cultural capital, I suppose, is in the United States, you don't talk about it openly. But back to universities and them as marriage market, there is a famous letter. It's called the Princeton Mother. And she wrote in the student newspaper. She graduated from Princeton some 2 or 3 decades before. And she wrote and she said, forget all of that stuff about leaning in or leaning out. Eventually, what matters to you as a woman is finding a man who is going to be a really high earner, will provide you with a life that you hope to have. And she said, now, being at Stanford, you have the selection of men who are worthy of you. So don't waste your time. Find a husband before you graduate. And, it kind of sounds too American. It sounds kind of offensive. What do you mean that I care about those issues of money and so on? But then if you look at work of a sociologist, and this is one example of how I marry general findings to stories. There is a story about a couple. As it happened, they are both graduates of Princeton. And the woman said that, as they were married, she thought that with equivalent education and equivalent skills, neither of them will have to work killer jobs. In other words, work that really consumes their entire lives. But what she found was that both of them were working those killer jobs. And she said, I realized that we cannot continue on this way. And I realized that my husband would not leave his high stress, high income job. So I left my job and became a homemaker. And so even in the United States, those stereotypes of husband earning money, wives maybe working part-time or lower stress job or just being a homemaker is really very common. And as much as we don't like to admit it, marriages where wives earn more than husbands many times work perfectly well, but on average, they are less stable than marriages where husbands earn more than wives.
Right. That sounds very much like the Indian culture as well, because, a lot of women are now working in India as well. But I know so many people who've done higher degrees, but, they've gone back to being a homemaker after marriage. And another interesting thing that you mentioned about the money part, that maybe, parents of daughters would see whether the groom is, or the would-be groom is earning enough. Um, a lot of families in India now, they also see whether the women are earning. So for some reason, they would see that, but a lot of them would not prefer them to work post marriage. And in fact, the more attractive traits for them would be perhaps a fair skin and things like that. So all those things that we saw when we were growing up, we thought that these will go over the years. They all exist and they're all thriving for some reason. But
They are. Yeah, we have guests now with us who are grandkids of people we know. And so I was talking with them about that. And I said, in the United States, they have this thing, I don't know how it works in India, where men are supposed to propose to women with a diamond ring, and then they become engaged. And of course, it is kind of ceremonial. That is, sometimes the man and woman go to the jewelry store together to choose that ring, but then they stage that ceremony. And I say, if I had to go through that in Israel, I would still be single. It seems so embarrassing. And so even though people talk about being equal in marriage, when you go on a date as young people, women still expect to be the ones who get to go free, and men expect to be the ones who pay for that date. And I say, how can you be equal if you are still playing this game of who pays for a date? So it's uncomfortable, but that is really part of culture.
yeah. So, but coming back to our discussion on finances, also another thing that I've heard you talking about digital disruption, and you have very specific views about that. I think in the financial domain, one of the biggest digital disruptions could be robo advisory. But we are also talking about human traits and the need to understand circumstantial aspects before you can perhaps build a plan for someone. So what do you think about that, and how do you think it'll pan out in the future?
So as it happened, I'm on the advisory board of one of those robo advisors. So I know how they work.
Hmm.
And what they try to do really is to bypass the human advisor. And of course, they are much less expensive than human advisors. Now, they are very, very useful. That is for people who are not financial experts. They would like somebody to build their plan for them, the financial plan, to build a portfolio for them, to take care of realizing losses and rebalancing and all of those mundane things. Now, it used to be that human advisors used to do that. That is, they would take pride in constructing very good portfolios and planning for spending and saving. But that now is pretty generic. Robo advisors do that. And so what is the comparative advantage of human advisors is really in creating that human connection. I use an analogy of physician. When you go to a physician, of course, you expect that physician to be on the frontier of knowledge of medicine. You expect him or her to know how to diagnose and how to prescribe and the like. But you also expect that bedside manner, as we call it. You also expect that a physician to be empathetic, to ask you to make you comfortable such that you can disclose things that are embarrassing. God knows there are things about our wealth that are embarrassing that we don't talk about in company. The same applies to financial advisors. That is, they cannot compete on lower fees. They cannot compete on constructing portfolios. What they can compete on is that relationship they form with clients, that bedside manner. And so you can see, one advisor, for example, told me about a couple that came to him, and they said, before you start planning for us, you should know that we have a disabled son, and we have to plan for him such that he is taken care of long after we are gone. So here's a case where a potential client already disclosed to you their pain, their injury, and now you can help them. And of course, this has financial aspects because you have to. It's not just a matter of empathy. It is a matter of creating a trust fund or whatever it is to help that kid. Now, some financial advisors still find it hard to cross that boundary between finances and life, and ask questions about how's your family doing, how are your children. Some parents who are very wealthy are reluctant to give their adult children, people in their 20s, money because they're afraid that they're going to become spoiled and lose their initiative to become successful. But people in their 20s are still very, very poor. That is, they're just beginning their careers. This is when they need help. That is, they don't need help when we die at 95 and our children are 65. They need help now when they are in their 20s. And so I found it really interesting in terms of culture again, that in this sense, many Americans, not all, of course, are very different from Israelis as I know them, and from us. That is, when Nava, my wife of more than 50 years, and I were about to be married, and I was 22 and Nava was 21. Uh, we had dinner together with our parents, and after dinner, Nava and I were excused to go for a walk, and our parents sat down to business. And business meant how much each pair of parents is going to give the young couple to get them started on a down payment on a house. And you can see that that is kind of expected. It was not a surprise. In fact, I learned later that Nava's mother said to her father, whatever Meir's parents offer, we are going to match. And even though they had less money at the time than my parents, they borrowed some from family and repaid it later. And so you can see how those finances, family, culture, all interact.
Yeah, and so many intersections with different cultures, if I may say. Of course, in India, dowry is it's an ill. It's something that's not acceptable, but it still goes on. But some people are still, justify it, saying that we are just helping the kids start out a new life. So, but the form that it takes, of course, is different because it's only one party that is paying it. So, of course, there are these layers that come in. But coming back to the robo advisory question, I also feel sometimes, and correct me if I'm wrong, that do you think that the robo advisory part somewhere it becomes maybe it gives out more rational solutions or explanations rather than what would suit a normal person who may have other other kind of commitments?
Yes, I think that is true. I think that human advisors sometimes empathize with their clients too much. That is, they say, if you want alternatives, if you want hedge funds, lots of people want to invest in those hedge funds, private equity, for the snob effect, for those expressive and emotional benefits. That is, I'm not a regular person. I have $10 million. And so, of course, I can invest in mutual funds that anyone with $3,000 can invest in. But how will I tell my friends that I am really rich by investing in stuff in that takes at least $1 million to get in? And so when you say I'm into hedge funds, you are not so crass as to say I am rich, but in fact, what you're saying, I am rich. And so robo advisors, because they don't listen to clients, they design portfolios that are more suitable for them than some of those that are bent to those desires that not always be wise. And so that really is useful. Again, human advisors can do the same thing, but what you need is an advisor who is empathetic, but does not care too much about your emotions. That is somebody who is going to say, if you continue spending this way, you're going to be bankrupt soon, rather than say, oh, well, that's fine. You can go on this trip and take your entire family with you.
So there has to be a balance on both counts. So
there has to be a balance.
So, Mr. Statman, coming to the end of this interview, I would also like to pose a very personal question to you, because you've been practicing and researching behavioral finance, people, how they react, what kind of errors they make. How has all that learning or research or your finding affected you as a person and your decisions and finances?
Well, so I am normal. And what I find is that I'm using myself as kind of a laboratory. And I say, if I, for example, am averse to regret, that is common, not just to me, it is common to other people as well. And so, for example, I have a portfolio, and every day it goes up or down by thousands of dollars, and I just don't care. But if I just put in some amount of money, then I watch the market. Did it go up or did it go down? And if I bought and then the market goes down, I feel terrible. And I'm kind of laughing at myself and saying, this makes no sense, Mayor. Well, it makes no rational sense, but it makes perfect normal sense. And so, you know, I kind of, I'm able to feel the emotion, but I am also able to keep my distance from that emotion. That is all our mothers told us. When you're angry, don't open your mouth until you count until 10. Okay, because we all know that if you say things in anger, you're going to say things that you just cannot take back, that are going to be very damaging. The same thing about regret. Now, when I had to move a large chunk of money from one mutual fund company, one part of my retirement plan to another, I just kind of had during a week or 10 days, the money would be in cash as it moved from stocks in one to stocks in the other. And I said, what if the market zooms while my money is in cash? How would I feel? What the regret is going to be? And so I kind of said, all right, Mayor, here's a contract you sign with yourself. If the market goes up, you're not going to feel regret. And if the market goes down, you're not going to feel pride. So you know, of course, it did not fully help, but at least it helped somewhat. And so it is really interesting, and I find it odd that there are some people who are able to separate their own lives from their scholarship and not use their own experience in life as part that underlies their scholarship.
If you could just list a few, maybe the top 5 cognitive and emotional errors that they should really steer clear of.
Well, I think that one is hindsight. That is, people look back and they say, I just knew it. I just knew the market is going to go down. So why did I put my money in? And so they feel regret. And that regret is really magnified because of that hindsight, because they think that they just knew. But if they keep a diary where they write down what they knew and why they made the decision, and they go back, they find out that what they think they knew, they didn't. You know, and so that is one to guard against. Another is framing. Framing is very important in that it simplifies difficult problems and make them easier. For example, when you are looking for a contractor, you don't look at all the possible contractors. You say, I'm going to look at 3. I'm going to see which of them offers a better price and which of them looks like a person I can work with. But sometimes framing can mislead you. So for example, when people trade, when I trade, or when I feel like trading, I say, if I buy this stock, who is the idiot who is selling it to me? Because in every trade, I say there is an idiot. And if you don't know who it is likely you. And so the proper framing for trading is playing tennis against an opponent on the other side of the net, like Djokovic. Would I play tennis against Djokovic if the loser pays $100,000 to the winner? Of course, no. But the way people think of trading, normal people, but ignorant, they think about it as the equivalent of playing tennis against a practice wall, where you can hit the ball, you can see where it hit the wall, you can see how it is going to go back, you position yourself perfectly. And so I think that if people, when they are about to trade, then because they read something in the newspaper or heard something on television, if they ask themselves, who is the idiot on the other side, that would stop them from trading. There is fear. Fear is very useful. When you spot a snake, you don't say, let me check if it's poisonous or not. The first reaction is move back. Fear is really a very useful emotion. Fear gets you to slam the brakes when the car in front of you suddenly stops. But sometimes people are so afraid of losing any amount of money that they would not invest, say, in the stock market, and that is exaggerated fear. So these are kind of two cognitive errors and one emotional shortcut and error. And you have to, again, distinguish shortcuts, which are okay, from errors. A shortcut can be useful, for example, just examining 3 contractors rather than a dozen, but sometimes they can turn into errors. And you also have to ask yourself what enhances your well-being, what brings you pleasure. For some people, trading is pleasurable, just like video games are pleasurable, like golf. I don't play golf. I think that golf is stupid, but I wouldn't say it to other people. For some people, it is fun. It costs money, of course, but who am I to judge? That is, I find joy in other things that can be equally expensive. And so we have to really figure out the difference between what it is a want and what it is an error. And of course, satisfy our wants and try to minimize our errors.
Thank you so much, Mr. Statman, for this lively conversation for the Indian audience. And we are really proud to host you on this interview series, for which you are our first guest. So thanks a lot again. And we hope to host you again in some of our events or other things.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful to speak with you, Nidhi.
Thanks a lot.